My dear friends, there are nights when the body lies down, but the heart does not follow. The room is quiet. The phone is dark. The world has stopped asking you to answer, to explain, to be strong. And yet, somewhere inside, an old voice begins again. A voice that says, "After all I have done for you, how could you leave?" A voice that calls itself love, but feels like a hand closing around the throat of a small, frightened bird. Perhaps you know this feeling. The strange guilt of wanting to be free from someone who once cared for you. The heaviness of remembering both the kindness and the wound. The confusion of asking whether love is still love when it makes your wings fold inward. Tonight, we will not rush to judge anyone. We will simply sit beside an old story, as one sits beside a small fire in the dark. A story of a white swan, a black arrow, and a young heart that saw something most people forget to see. Before asking who owns the bird, he asked where it was hurting. And perhaps, my dear friends, that is where healing begins. So, my dear friends, as we enter this story, let us enter it gently, not as judges, not as people searching for someone to blame, and not as wounded hearts looking for one more reason to become hard. We will listen the way one listens to rain on an old roof, quietly, without forcing the sky to explain itself. The story we are about to sit beside comes from a Buddhist literary retelling of the early life of Siddhatta, the one who would later become the Buddha. In that telling, there is a white swan, an arrow, and a question that still moves through human hearts. Does the one who wounds have the right to possess what he has wounded? But tonight, we will not turn this question into anger. We will turn it into seeing. Because sometimes the most important part of healing is not deciding who was wrong. It is noticing where the wound is still open. It is seeing how a word, a memory, a debt, or a promise can remain inside the heart like a small dark arrow. And perhaps, my dear friends, we may also notice something more subtle. The arrow is not only in the bird. Sometimes it is in the hand that wants to hold. Sometimes it is in the voice that says, "You are mine." So let us breathe softly now. Let the night become wide. And let the story show us what love looks like when it remembers the wound. So before the swan appears clearly before us, my dear friends, let us become quiet enough to receive it. You do not have to let go of anything tonight. You do not have to forgive before your heart is ready. You do not have to decide whether to stay, leave, speak, or remain silent. For now, simply notice that you are here. Let your shoulders drop a little, as if they have been carrying a coat soaked by many seasons of rain. Let the jaw soften. Let the tongue rest. Let the small muscles around the eyes loosen, like curtains being lowered in a house after dusk. Feel the back of your head. Feel the weight of your arms. Feel the chest, not as a place that must open quickly, but as a quiet room where something tender has been waiting. And beneath you, feel the bed holding the body without asking for an explanation. The breath comes. The breath goes. No one needs to own it. No one needs to command it. If an old memory touches the wound, let it touch softly. Do not push it away. Do not invite it to stay. Just know, somewhere within you, a wing is still listening for the sky. And now, my dear friends, let the story open slowly. In the old telling, Siddhatta was sitting beneath the shade of the forest, speaking to two children who had come to love his quiet presence. Sujatada sat near him. Svastika, the young cowherd, listened with the stillness of someone receiving water after a long walk in the sun. The afternoon was soft around them. Leaves moved gently overhead, somewhere beyond the trees. The river breathed along its banks. The earth held the warmth of the day, and the forest carried that simple fragrance of grass, bark, and dust after sunlight has touched it for many hours. Then Siddhatta began to remember. He was only a boy then, 9 years old, wandering alone in the royal garden. My dear friends, do not imagine a great teacher yet, seated before disciples. Imagine a child with clear eyes, walking through a quiet garden where the air was open, where the sky was wide, where the world had not yet explained its sorrow. And then it happened. From above, a white swan fell, not like a leaf, not like a flower loosened by wind. It fell with the terrible weight of a living thing suddenly torn from the sky. Its body struck the ground before the young Siddhatta. Its wings struggled against the dust. Its neck trembled. Its breath came in fear. In one wing, an arrow was buried deep. The white feathers were no longer only white. A dark red stain began to spread where the sharp point had entered. The bird twisted in pain, not understanding the hand that had sent such suffering into its flight. Siddhatta ran to it. He did not ask who had shot it. He did not ask whether it belonged to anyone. He did not stand at a distance and think about blame. He took the swan into his arms. And in that first gesture, my dear friends, the whole story had already begun to turn. Before ownership, there was suffering. Before argument, there was blood. Before anyone could say, "It is mine," there was a trembling life asking not to be left alone. My dear friends, the young Siddhatta held the swan as one holds a lamp in the wind. He was a prince. Yes, a child of the Sakya clan, born into rooms where servants moved quietly, where fine cloth touched the skin, where people bowed before speaking. But in that moment, none of that stood between his heart and the small trembling body in his arms. The swan was not a prize to him. It was not a lesson yet. It was not a beautiful thing fallen from the sky for a child to keep. It was warm life, frightened life, wounded life. Its feathers shivered against his hands. Its wing opened and closed with helpless effort. The arrow had entered where flight should have been effortless. Siddhatta pulled the arrow out. The bird shook with pain. Blood wet the white feathers. He pressed his thumb gently against the wound, not with the skill of a physician, but with the instinct of a heart that could not look away. My dear friends, this is often where real compassion begins, not in a speech, not in a belief, but in the body moving toward pain before the mind has time to build a wall. He carried the swan inside and looked for Sundari, the palace attendant. She too entered the story quietly, as many caring people do, not as the center of attention, not as the one who would be remembered first, but as a pair of hands willing to help life remain life. At Siddhatta's request, she brought mulberry leaves, chewed them soft, and placed them over the wound. There was nothing grand in this. No ceremony, no thunder in the sky, only leaves, breath, blood, and a child watching closely. The swan trembled. Perhaps it was cold. Perhaps fear had entered deeper than the arrow. Siddhatta removed his woolen cloak and wrapped the bird in its warmth. Then he placed it near the fire. See the image. My dear friends, a young prince beside the hearth, a white swan wrapped in wool, a wound covered with leaves, a room growing still around one small life. And somewhere inside this stillness, a question begins to form for all of us. Who has ever held your pain before asking what you owed them? The answer does not need to come tonight. Let the question simply rest beside you, like the swan beside the fire. For soon, another kind of hand will enter the room, not to heal, but to claim. And so, my dear friends, another hand entered the room, not a hand carrying leaves, not a hand bringing warmth, a hand that still remembered the bow. Siddhatta came in looking for the bird. He was young, too, a child of the same royal world, strong in spirit, sharp in mind, not foolish, not empty. The old story does not ask us to hate him. It asks us to see something in him that can also live quietly in us. He came with the confidence of one who had done something and believed that doing it gave him a right. "Have you seen a white bird fall nearby?" he asked. And before the room could return to stillness, his eyes found the swan near the fire. There it was, wrapped in wool, its wounded wing covered with crushed leaves, its breath still uncertain. It had fallen from the sky, but it had not fallen out of life. Warmth was gathering around it. Care had begun its slow work. Devdatta moved toward it. Siddhatta stopped him. "My dear friends, listen closely to the quiet violence hidden in this moment." The swan was not flying now. It was not singing. It was not crossing the blue air with its own strength. It was helpless, trembling, held between pain and healing. And still, Devdatta looked at it and saw a claim. "It is mine," he said. "I shot it down." There are sentences like that in the world. They do not always sound cruel at first. Sometimes they sound almost reasonable. "I worked for this. I suffered for this. I waited for this. I made this happen. Therefore, it belongs to me." But the heart must be very careful. My dear friends, when it begins to call injury a bond, a wound is not a contract. A fall is not consent. The fact that your arrow reached something does not mean your love did. Near the fire, the young Siddhatta stood between the hand that had wounded and the life that was trying to heal. He did not yet need many words. His body had already answered. There are moments when compassion first appears not as speech, but as a quiet refusal to let the wounded be taken back by the wounder. My dear friends, there are moments when the mind hears something untrue, and yet the untruth arrives dressed in fine clothing. Devdatta's argument was not clumsy. It was not foolish. It had the sharp, clean edge of a blade that has been polished well. The bird had been flying in the open sky. It belonged to no one. His arrow brought it down. Therefore, he believed, the fallen bird was his. Can you feel how dangerous such reasoning can be? It does not shout at first. It does not need to. It stands upright and says, "I caused this. I reached it. I marked it. So now it belongs to me." The young Siddhatta heard this, and the old telling does not make him into a stone statue without feeling. It tells us something more honest and more human. He felt anger rise. He saw the force in Devdatta's words, and for a moment, he wanted to strike him. My dear friends, this is important. Compassion is not the absence of fire in the chest. Compassion is what happens when the fire is not allowed to become another arrow. Siddhatta did not obey the first heat of his body. He did not let his hand become what his heart was trying to protect the swan from. He stood there, near the warmth of the hearth, with the wounded bird behind him, and he waited for a deeper answer to appear. In that waiting, the room became very still. The swan breathed. The leaves rested over the wound. The arrow was no longer in the wing, but its meaning was still in the room. My dear friends, many people lose their way at this very place. They see a wrong idea, and they become another wound trying to defeat the first wound. But Siddhatta paused. He looked not only at Devdatta, he looked at the bird. And because he looked at the one who was hurting, not only at the one who was arguing, the answer began to change shape inside him. Not victory, not punishment, not ownership against ownership. Care. My dear friends, at last, the young Siddhatta found the shape of his answer. He did not answer Devdatta with the same hunger to possess. He did not say, "No, the swan is mine because I found it." That would have been only another cage, made from gentler wood. He looked at the bird. That is where wisdom often begins. Not with the person who shouts the loudest, not with the one who brings the strongest argument, not with the one who says, "I have a right," but with the one who is bleeding. The swan lay near the fire, wrapped in warmth, its breath still small, its wounded wing covered with leaves. The bow was still in Devdatta's hand. The arrow had been removed. But the claim remained. Siddhatta said, "In the simple way a child speaks, when truth has not yet learned to decorate itself, that the bird was hurt. He had taken it into his arms. He had cared for it. He had protected it. The swan needed the one who was helping it live, not the one who had brought it down." Devdatta did not accept this. He was clever. He pressed his reasoning again. When the bird was flying in the sky, he said, "It belonged to no one. But his arrow had struck it. His arrow had made it fall. Therefore, he believed, the bird should belong to him." My dear friends, this is the old wound in many human hearts. We mistake impact for intimacy. We mistake influence for love. We mistake the power to make someone fall for the right to decide where they must remain. But the young Siddhatta saw another law, quieter and deeper than ownership. A living being does not belong to the hand that harms it simply because that hand has reached it. A wound does not make a home. Pain does not create a bond of love. Near the hearth, two kinds of relationship stood facing each other. One said, "I touched it, so it is mine." The other said, "It is suffering, so I must care." One looked at the swan and saw proof of skill. The other looked at the swan and saw a trembling life. And perhaps, my dear friends, this is the question the story lays gently before us tonight. When we say we love someone, do we see their wound, or only our claim? The fire kept burning softly. The swan breathed, and the room waited to learn which kind of seeing the world would choose. My dear friends, the question could not remain in that quiet room. A wounded swan lay near the fire. Two boys stood on either side of it. One had brought it down. One had lifted it up. And between them was a kind of argument that the world has never stopped having. So the matter was brought before the adults. The old story tells us that the young Siddhatta carried the swan, while Devdatta carried his bow and arrows. They came into the place where the king and the officials were gathered. The affairs of the kingdom had to pause for the trembling life of one bird. Listen to that. My dear friends, sometimes the smallest wounded being can interrupt the largest room. The officials listened. They heard Devdatta's reasoning. They heard Siddhatta's reasoning. And for a long time, they could not decide. Many of them leaned toward Devdatta's argument. It sounded orderly. It sounded practical. The arrow had struck the bird. The hunter had brought it down. Perhaps, they thought, the bird belonged to the hunter. This is how the world often becomes confused. It listens to the language of power and mistakes it for clarity. It listens to the language of injury and calls it a claim. Then the king coughed. Only a few small sounds from the throat of one man, and the room became silent. The officials looked toward him, and after that, the old telling says, they began to agree that Siddhatta's reasoning was better. The swan should stay with the one who protected it. So Siddhatta was given the bird. But my dear friends, his heart was not filled with triumph. Even as a child, he could see that the victory was not completely clean. Many had not truly understood compassion. They had only turned toward the side nearest to power. And this made the story deeper. The swan was safe for the moment, but the world had not yet learned to see. Sometimes, even when kindness wins, it wins inside a room that still does not understand the wound. My dear friends, Siddhatta was allowed to keep the swan, but this is not where the deepest part of the story rests. If the story ended there, it would only be a story about winning an argument. A kind child defeats a forceful child. Compassion is judged to be better than harm. The wounded bird is protected from the one who shot it down. That would already be beautiful, but it would not yet be complete. The old telling says that Siddhatta cared for the swan for 4 days. For quiet days. Not days of victory. Not days of display. Just the slow, humble time that healing requires. The wound in the wing began to close. The trembling began to soften. The bird that had fallen from the sky began to remember, somewhere in its body, that it had once belonged to open air. My dear friends, this is the part we must not miss. Siddhatta did not save the swan in order to own it. He did not say, "I protected you, therefore you must remain with me." He did not turn his kindness into a chain. When he saw that the wound had healed, he released the bird. He let it go. He told it to fly far away, so it would not be struck down again by Devdutta's arrow. See the young prince now. No court around him. No argument. No officials leaning toward one side or another. Only a child, a healed bird, and the quiet space between two open hands. The swan had first been held because it was wounded. Now it was released because it was alive. This is a very deep kind of love. My dear friends, the hand that harms says, "Because I reached you, you are mine." The hand that clings says, "Because I saved you, you are mine." But the hand of compassion says, "Because you are healed, you may return to the sky." Perhaps someone once wounded you and called it love. Perhaps someone once helped you and then made you carry the weight of their help. Or perhaps you have held someone too tightly because you were afraid that if they flew, your own heart would be empty. Let the swan teach gently. To love is not to keep the wing folded. To love is to protect the wing until it can open. My dear friends, the old story has now shown us something very simple and very difficult. Compassion is not the same as possession. To harm and then claim is not love. To help and then claim is not love either. Both hands may look different from the outside, but if both hands close into a fist, the wing cannot open. The young Siddhatta's heart moved towards suffering. That was the first movement. He saw the bird fall. He saw the blood. He saw the trembling, and his body answered with care. This is the beginning of compassion. Not a beautiful idea, not a word we say about ourselves. Compassion begins when the suffering of another is allowed to matter. But compassion must be joined with understanding. Without understanding, even kindness can become another form of holding. We may say, "I only want what is best for you," while quietly meaning, "I want you to remain where I can feel safe." We may say, "I have done so much for you," while quietly building a cage out of our own goodness. My dear friends, karma is not a punishment waiting in the sky. It is the path made by intention. An intention becomes a thought. A thought becomes a word. A word becomes an action. An action becomes a way of living. And slowly, without noticing, we build either a cage or a sky. Devdutta's intention reached outward through the arrow. Siddhatta's intention reached outward through his hands. One intention brought the bird down. The other helped the bird live. And later, when the bird was ready, that same compassion opened the hands and let it go. This is why the swan is such a quiet teacher. It teaches us that the question is not only, "Who hurt me?" It is also, "What do I do with my own hands now? Do I hold pain and turn it into a claim? Do I hold love and turn it into debt? Or can I learn, breath by breath, to care without tightening, to protect without possessing, to love without making another life smaller?" The wing knows the difference. The heart knows too. It may be afraid to admit it, but it knows. My dear friends, now let the old story come very gently into your own room. Not as a command, not as a verdict, only as a small lamp placed beside the bed. Perhaps there is someone in your life who still speaks through the language of debt. A parent, a lover, a friend, a teacher, a person who once helped you, or needed you, or held you close. And perhaps, when you try to breathe a little more freely, an old sentence rises in the dark. "After everything I have done for you, how could you leave? How could you change? How could you become someone I did not choose?" My dear friends, gratitude is a beautiful thing. It is one of the softest flowers in the human heart. But gratitude is not a cage. To be grateful for what someone gave you does not mean you must deny what hurt you. To remember kindness does not mean you must hand your wing back to the arrow. In our modern lives, the swan may not fall into a royal garden. It may fall in a text message you are afraid to answer. In a family dinner where your throat becomes tight. In a workplace where loyalty slowly becomes fear. In a relationship where care and control have been tied together for so long that the heart no longer knows which thread is which. And sometimes, my dear friends, we are not only the swan. Sometimes we are also the hand that holds too tightly. We want someone to stay because we are afraid of the emptiness their freedom may reveal in us. We call it love, but underneath it, something small and frightened is asking not to be abandoned. So tonight, do not condemn yourself. Simply look. Where is the arrow? Where is the wing? Where are your hands closing when they could soften? The practice tonight is not to win an argument. It is only to stop calling the arrow a home. My dear friends, and now, let the story become very quiet. The swan has been wounded. The arrow has been removed. The wing has been warmed, covered, protected, and given time. And when the moment came, Siddhatta did not close his hands around the life he had saved. He opened them. Let that image stay with you for a while. A young child, a healed bird, the sky waiting without hurry. There is no loud ending here. No victory song. No one needs to prove anything anymore. The deepest part of the story is not that Siddhatta kept the swan away from harm. It is that he did not keep the swan for himself. So tonight, my dear friends, you do not have to force your heart to be free all at once. You do not have to forgive before the wound is ready. You do not have to answer the old voice that says you belong to what hurt you. Just rest here. Feel the bed beneath you. Feel the breath moving in and out, asking nothing. If there is an arrow in your memory, let it be seen. If there is a wing in your heart, let it be touched with kindness. And if there is a hand within you that has been holding too tightly, let it soften, just a little. Let the swan fly. Let the arrow fall. Let the night hold what your hands no longer need to carry. Sleep gently. My dear friends, the sky is still there.